Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy at Night channel tonight. We will explore the beautiful and often overlooked world of flowers. They are admired for their beauty and fragrance, yet their real story reaches far deeper than appearance. Every bloom is the result of thousands of years of evolution. What seems delicate often hides remarkable strength. What appears simple is built on an intelligence that allows flowers to sense their surroundings and adapt in ways you would never imagine. The flower can control the behavior of insects. It can shift its chemistry to protect itself or to welcome a partner at exactly the right moment. It can regulate its temperature, manage the movement of air, and adjust to light with impressive accuracy. These abilities may be hidden, but they shape the world in remarkable ways. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, I invite you to subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too. One sleepy soul at a time, but for now, all you need to do is rest. Let your body soften and your mind relax, and allow nature's beauty to carry you to sleep. Let's begin. Some flowers can hear the buzz of bees inside. Certain blossoms, the petals act almost like tiny acoustic dishes. When a bee approaches, the vibrations from its wings ripple through the flower and cause the petals to tremble at just the right frequency. That trembling is not wasted motion. Within minutes, the plant can respond by slightly increasing the sugar content of its nectar, making the reward richer. Exactly when a pollinator is nearby, the flower does not need ears or a brain. Its tissues are tuned to specific vibrations in the air, sensitive enough to distinguish the low hum of a bee from the random rustle of wind. This sensitivity gives the plant an advantage. Instead of constantly investing energy in sweet nectar, it can deliver the best reward at the moment when it is most likely to be collected and carried away. A few desert flowers bloom only after rare rains. In some of the driest landscapes on Earth, flowers live by a very different calendar. Their seeds wait buried in hot, silent soil that may see no real rain for years. Instead of trying to grow in harsh drought, the seeds lie dormant, packed with the information they need, but patiently inactive. When a rare storm finally arrives, moisture soaks deep enough to trigger a chain of chemical reactions. Signals inside the seed announce that conditions have shifted from deadly to barely possible. Germination begins all at once. Across wide areas, stems rise, buds form, and fields that looked empty suddenly erupt into color. Each plant rushes through an entire lifetime in a short window, racing to produce new seeds before the land dries again. Then the flowers vanish, leaving behind another generation hidden under the sand, waiting for the next improbable rainfall. Some alpine flowers create their own heat. High in the mountains, cold air and thin atmosphere make life difficult for delicate tissues, yet some blossoms have found a surprising solution. Their central structures can raise their temperature above the surrounding air, turning each flower into a small pocket of warmth. This heat is not enough to feel from a distance, but for an insect landing on the bloom, it could be the difference between sluggish movement and comfortable activity. The warmer interior also helps pollen develop properly in an environment where frost can strike even in bright sunshine. To create this warmth, the plant increases its metabolic activity in specific tissues, burning stored energy more quickly than usual. The result is a gentle microclimate sheltered by overlapping petals. This strategy helps the flower attract cold, stressed pollinators and protect its own reproductive cells. At the same time, a quiet thermal engineering project in the snow. Certain flowers change color to signal pollinators. For some blossoms, color is not fixed. It is a kind of living message that updates over time. When a flower first opens, its petals may present a bright, inviting shade that stands out clearly against leaves and soil. This stage often corresponds to a rich supply of nectar and fresh pollen. After enough visits from pollinators, something important changes. Pigments within the petals shift, and the blossom takes on a duller or entirely different color. To us, it might look simply older. To a bee or butterfly that has learned which colors give the best rewards, it is a clear sign to move on and search for younger blooms. This color change helps both sides. Pollinators save time and energy. The plant reduces unnecessary damage to pollen and petals once reproduction is already underway, the bloom becomes its own signpost, updating its status. Through chemistry, some flowers use ultraviolet patterns as hidden guides. Human eyes do not tell the whole story of a garden. Many petals carry markings that are invisible to us, but blaze like landing lights in ultraviolet. Bees and other pollinators can see these wavelengths easily, so what looks like a simple yellow or white flower to us might appear as a strongly patterned target to them. The ultraviolet markings often form rings, stripes, or arrows that point straight toward the center of the blossom, where nectar and pollen are stored. This guidance system increases the efficiency of each visit. Insects do not need to search blindly. They read the pattern instantly and move along an ideal path. At the same time, the plant increases the chance that pollen will brush against the right parts of the insect's body. The result is a quiet visual conversation happening in a spectrum that humans rarely notice. Layered on top of familiar colors, there are flowers that smell like rotting meat to attract flies. Not every blossom aims to be sweet. Some plants rely on creatures that are drawn to decay rather than fragrance, so they adopt a very different strategy. Their flowers release complex blends of chemicals that closely resemble the scent of a carcass left in the sun. The petals may even take on mottled colors and textures that look disturbingly like flesh to a fly or beetle that specializes in finding dead animals. This combination is irresistible. The insect lands expecting food or a place to lay eggs, and instead finds chambers lined with pollen and sometimes temporary traps that keep it inside for a while during its attempt to escape. Pollen grains attached to its body in exactly the right spots. When it finally leaves and visits another similar blossom, the deception continues. What seems repulsive to us is simply another form of precise attraction. In the plant world, a few orchids mimic female insects to trick males into pollinating them. Among the most elaborate floral illusions are orchids that shape their petals and scents to resemble the bodies in mating signals of female insects to a male wasp or bee. The resemblance is close enough that it attempts courtship or even tries to mate with the flower itself. During this mistaken encounter, the insect presses against specific structures that attach packets of pollen to its body. The orchid often even matches the texture and tiny hair patterns of its target species and releases chemical signals that mimic the smell of a potential partner. When the confused insect flies off and repeats the same behavior on another blossom of the same orchid species, it unknowingly transfers the pollen to exactly the right place. The plant gains reliable pollination without offering nectar. The insect gains nothing at all except an oddly convincing illusion. Some flowers can count the hours of daylight with extraordinary precision. Plants track time in ways that do not rely on clocks, and some blossoms use this internal sense to decide exactly when to open and close. Deep within their cells, networks of genes and proteins form a biological rhythm that responds to light and darkness. As the season shifts, the length of daylight changes by small amounts, and the plant notices certain flowers will only form buds once the day has grown long enough or short enough to match their preferred window. Others open their petals at a specific hour, even if skies are cloudy. This timing is not random. It often coincides with the daily schedule of their main pollinators or with periods when conditions are safest. By linking flowering to precise measurements of day length, these plants reduce wasted effort and coordinate their reproductive events with the wider rhythms of their habitat, quietly keeping time through chemistry. There are flowers that trap insects temporarily to guarantee pollination. For some plants, a quick visit is not enough. Their blossoms are built as temporary holding chambers, gently detaining certain insects long enough to make sure pollen transfer really happens. A fly or beetle enters lured by scent or color and then discovers that exit routes have narrowed or closed. Slippery surfaces, inward pointing hairs, or shifting petal positions make it difficult to escape inside this chamber. The walls are lined with reproductive structures positioned to brush against the visitor as it struggles and crawls after a set period. Often after pollen has matured or stigmas have become receptive, parts of the flower relax or change shape, allowing the insect to leave. When it enters another bloom of the same species, the cycle repeats. The insect experiences a temporary inconvenience. The plant gains a much higher chance that its pollen will be delivered accurately. Certain flowers release their pollen in tiny explosive bursts. Not all pollen drifts gently on the breeze. Some blossoms store their grains under tension, like a drawn bow waiting to snap when the right trigger arrives. Often a specific vibration or a touch from a visiting insect. The structure releases. Suddenly pollen shoots out in a brief cloud, showering the pollinator or dispersing into the surrounding air with far more force than a passive release could achieve. In some species, specialized anthers twist or coil as they dry, then spring open when conditions are right. This method allows the plant to control the timing of pollen release very closely rather than losing grains slowly to wind and random bumps it delivers them in concentrated bursts that coincide with actual visits. The result is a strategy that uses stored mechanical energy to improve efficiency, turning a quiet flower into a tiny, well-aimed launcher. Some water flowers can warm themselves like small furnaces. A few aquatic plants create gentle heat inside their blossoms. Even while floating in cold water, their flowers contain active tissues that increase metabolic reactions in a focused area, releasing warmth that rises just enough to change the tiny environment around the bloom. This warmth helps spread scent more effectively across still ponds and marshes because warmer air currents lift fragrances that would otherwise linger close to the surface. It also encourages pollinators that might be sluggish in cool conditions to land and move more actively inside the flower. The temperature difference can be subtle, yet it is strong enough to influence the behavior of insects and the development of pollen by generating a stable pocket of warmth. These plants create a controlled space in an unpredictable habitat. It is a quiet example of biological engineering that allows a delicate flower to succeed in a place where cold water can restrict almost every other process. A few flowers communicate with each other through airborne chemicals. Some plants send messages into the air when they open close or encounter stress. These messages are made of drifting molecules that nearby flowers of the same species can detect. When one plant experiences a shift in conditions such as sudden shade or a surge in humidity, it may release a faint chemical signal carried by the breeze. Neighboring flowers respond by adjusting their own timing or scent output before the conditions reach them directly. This communication is not spoken or heard, yet it allows scattered individuals to act in a coordinated way. By sharing information across short distances, they reduce waste and improve the chances that pollinators will arrive. When nectar is at its best, this quiet chemical dialogue turns a cluster of flowers into a network that adapts collectively, showing how even rooted plants can exchange information in surprisingly responsive ways. Some flowers bloom only at night and rely on moonlit pollinators. There are blossoms that remain tightly closed during the day and open only when darkness arrives. Their pale petals reflect the faint light of the moon, making them more visible to moths and other night-active creatures. Instead of producing bright daytime colors, these flowers rely on strong drifting scents that travel far through cool air. Their nectar often becomes more concentrated after sunset, offering a rich reward to the few visitors that navigate by touch, smell, and dim reflections. The timing is incredibly precise. Many open shortly after dusk and close again before dawn, protecting delicate tissues from daytime heat and conserving energy for the hours when their preferred pollinators are active. This nocturnal rhythm allows them to thrive in environments crowded with daytime competitors. They carve out a unique ecological space by working with the stillness and calm of the night rather than the brightness of the sun. There are flowers that move in subtle ways to touch their pollinators. Some blossoms do not simply wait for contact. Their internal structure shift when triggered by a visiting insect, bending or tilting in controlled motions that ensure pollen sticks to exactly the right place. These movements are small enough to escape casual notice, but they happen quickly once the flower detects pressure or vibration. A stamen might swing inward. The petal may press gently against a visitor's body. A hidden lever-like structure can release tension that changes the shape of the bloom. This mechanical response improves the accuracy of pollen transfer and reduces the loss of grains to the air. It also helps prevent nectar thieves from escaping without contributing to the plant's reproduction. The flower behaves almost like a miniature machine with moving Parts that activate only under specific conditions. This blend of structure and motion forms a quiet choreography between plant and pollinator. Some tropical flowers grow directly from tree trunks in dense forests where sunlight rarely reaches the ground. Some species use a strategy known as trunk flowering. Instead of reaching for bright canopy light, their blossoms appear along the bark of thick tree trunks and major branches. This placement brings flowers directly into the pathways of animals that climb or walk along the trees. Fruit bats, beetles, and small mammals often pass within centimeters of these unusual blooms, making trunk flowering an efficient way to catch attention in a crowded habitat. The blossoms may be large, strongly scented, or thick-skinned. To withstand frequent contact, their fruits often develop right on the trunk, as well supported by the strength of the main wood rather than thin branches. This strategy transforms the entire tree into a vertical garden that interacts with wildlife at many levels, showing how flowers can adapt to the architecture of their surroundings with remarkable flexibility. Certain flowers build symbiotic relationships with single species of pollinator. Some plants depend on only one type of animal to complete their reproductive cycle. Their flowers evolve shapes, scents, and timing that match the behavior and body structure of that single partner so precisely that other visitors cannot pollinate them effectively. The match can be extraordinarily exact. The tube may be just the right length for one bird's beak or one insect's tongue. Anthers may sit at the perfect height to brush against a particular species and no other. While this narrow partnership seems risky, it ensures highly accurate pollen transfer. The animal benefits as well, because it receives a consistent food source that few competitors can access over long stretches of time. The plant and pollinator shape one another, creating an exclusive mutual relationship. Each relies on the other's presence, forming a quiet bond that ties together two very different forms of life. Some flowers can sense humidity and adjust their scent. Moisture in the air carries scent more effectively than dry conditions, and some flowers use this to their advantage. Specialized cells in their petals can detect subtle shifts in humidity. When the air becomes damp and scent molecules can travel farther, the flower increases the release of its fragrance. In dry conditions, it reduces the output to conserve energy. This adjustment is not random. It often aligns with the daily habits of pollinators that prefer certain conditions for flight. By tuning their scent to match the weather, these plants improve their chances of being found without wasting resources. This simple yet powerful sensing ability reveals how closely blossoms interact with the atmosphere around them. They respond not only to light or temperature, but to moisture itself, using it as a quiet guide for when to send their chemical messages into the air. There are flowers that mimic dewdrops to lure curious insects. Some blossoms produce glossy bead-like structures on their petals that look like fresh morning due to small insects searching for water or glistening points of interest. These beads are irresistible. When they land to investigate, they brush against pollen or follow the curved shapes of the petals deeper into the flower. The mimicry is remarkably effective because the beads catch light in the same way real droplets do. Even though they contain no water, they are often made of smooth, reflective tissues or tiny layers of wax. By imitating the plant gains extra visitors that might not have approached otherwise. This strategy works especially well in dry habitats where real droplets are rare. The flower creates a visual illusion that draws attention from creatures that rely on glimmering cues to explore their surroundings. Some flowers use electric fields to signal bees. The air around a bloom can hold a faint electrical charge, and bees are sensitive to these tiny differences. As a bee approaches, the charge around its body interacts with the field of the flower. Some blossoms shape their surface and internal structures in ways that produce a distinct electrical pattern. This pattern can indicate whether the flower has recently been visited or if it still holds a full supply of nectar. Bees detect these signals instantly, allowing them to choose the most rewarding blossoms without wasting energy. When a bee lands, the contact changes the electrical state of the flower for a short period, providing information to the next visitor. This quiet exchange creates a layer of communication beyond color or scent. It allows a plant to broadcast important details through Invisible fields that only certain creatures can read. A few flowers shape their petals to create natural sonic amplifiers. Some plants grow curved or bowl-shaped petals that enhance the sounds made by approaching pollinators. These shapes act like small echo chambers that highlight specific frequencies in the air. When certain insects fly nearby, the vibrations resonate within the blossom, making the presence of the visitor easier to detect. This amplification guides the plant's internal responses, such as increasing nectar production or preparing its reproductive structures for contact for the pollinators. The shape may also help them navigate by reflecting sound in ways that stand out from the background. The entire structure becomes a natural instrument shaped over time through the pressures of survival. It transforms the flower into a listening and responding system attuned to the acoustic world around it, adding sound to the list of subtle signals plants can use to their advantage. Some flowers use reflective petals to stand out in low light, in shaded woodland edges, deep forest floors, and the dim minutes of dawn and dusk. Some blossoms have turned their petals into natural reflectors. Instead of simply absorbing light, the surface of each petal is built from layers that scatter and bounce brightness back outward. Tiny folds, ridges, and air-filled spaces inside the tissue act together like a field of mirrors, catching even weak rays that filter through leaves. To human eyes, this can look like a soft glow, but to insects with more sensitive vision, it becomes a bright signal against a dark background. The effect is especially strong in flowers with pale or metallic hues, where reflected light is not buried under heavy pigment. Pollinators that are active in low light learn that these shining targets are worth visiting, so the plant gains attention at times. When other species fade into the shadows, reflective petals turn scarce light into a reliable calling card. Certain mountain flowers grow hairy petals as natural insulation in high alpine meadows. The air can feel gentle one moment and cut like ice the next. Flowers that choose to bloom in this unstable world must protect extremely delicate tissues from freezing winds and harsh radiation. Some have solved this problem by covering their petals and outer floral parts with fine hairs that trap a thin layer of still air. This trapped layer acts like a tiny blanket, slowing the escape of warmth generated by the sun and by the plant's own metabolism. The hairs also scatter intense ultraviolet light that pours down through clear mountain skies, preventing damage to sensitive pigments and pollen. When insects land, they find a surface that is slightly less cold than the open air, which encourages them to stay longer and move more actively inside the bloom. Hairy petals are not just a visual quirk, they're carefully evolved insulation that allows these flowers to operate in a climate that swings between brilliance and frost. Some flowers produce nectar with complex chemical messages. Sweetness is only the beginning of what many nectars contain. Within the clear liquid hidden at the base of certain blossoms is a cocktail of sugars, amino acids, ions, and specialized compounds that influence the minds and bodies of visiting animals. Some of these molecules sharpen memory, helping a bee remember the scent and shape of a particular flower, so it returns more often. Others adjust the energy content or viscosity of the nectar, shaping how quickly a pollinator feeds and how long it lingers. In some species, the mixture changes as the bloom ages. Early nectar may encourage exploration and learning, while later nectar calms visitors. Once enough pollen has been moved, even the microbes that live in nectar can alter its chemistry, adding another layer of signals. Pollinators do not consciously interpret these messages, but their behavior shifts in predictable ways. The plant uses chemistry to guide partners toward patterns of movement that best support successful reproduction. There are flowers whose seeds travel on water for great distances along riverbanks, lake shores, and coastal wetlands. Certain flowering plants turn water into a highway for their offspring. Their seeds develop with buoyant structures that keep them afloat, such as spongy tissues, trapped air pockets, or thick protective coats that resist soaking when fruits ripen and break. Open seeds drop onto the surface and begin drifting with currents and waves. Some ride gentle streams that carry them far downstream. Others enter tidal waters where rhythmic surges move them back and forth until they lodge in a suitable patch of mud or sand during the journey, the protective layers shield the embryo from salt decay and sudden changes in temperature. This method allows a single plant to spread descendants over wide areas, reaching new islands, river bends, or distant shorelines without any help from animals or wind. Each flower becomes the starting point for a quiet voyage that may end many landscapes away. Some flowers can bloom under thick snow when winter loosens its grip. Only slightly a few determined species are already preparing to flower beneath the snow. Their underground bulbs, rhizomes, or storage roots have been waiting through months of cold, with reserves of energy ready to release as soon as soil warms by even a small amount. Growth begins, buds push upward, sometimes while the surface is still covered by icy layers. The tip of the developing shoot can generate enough warmth through active metabolism to melt a narrow tunnel. As it rises, by the time the bud reaches open air, it may still be surrounded by white ground and chilled wind, yet it opens anyway. These early blooms take advantage of light that is not yet blocked by leaves and of pollinators that have very few other food sources. Snow-resistant petals are often thick and waxy, protecting reproductive parts from freezing droplets. The entire strategy is a race to capture the first workable days of the year. A few flowers build gentle microclimates inside their blossoms. Step inside the curved chamber of certain blooms, and the air feels noticeably different from the world outside. Petals that form cups, funnels, or overlapping roofs create pockets where wind slows and humidity climbs. Sunlight that enters is absorbed and returned as soft warmth, which the enclosing structure holds close. Within this sheltered space, temperature fluctuates less sharply, keeping pollen grains hydrated and stigmas receptive for insects. These microclimates provide a resting place that is calmer and milder than the surrounding environment. On chilly mornings, a bee can warm up faster by lingering inside. On hot, dry afternoons, the slightly cooler, more moist air can reduce stress. Plants that invest in this internal architecture often gain more consistent pollination because visitors stay longer and move more thoroughly through the reproductive parts. The flower becomes a tiny room with climate controls tuned to its own needs. Some flowers grow only on slopes facing specific directions across a hilly landscape. Conditions on a north-facing slope can differ dramatically from those on a south-facing one. Sunlight strikes at different angles, evaporation rates change, and soil remains cooler or warmer depending on exposure. Certain flowering species become so closely adapted to these patterns that they appear only on slopes that face a particular direction. Their seeds may germinate successfully only when winter snow melts at the right pace or when spring sunshine arrives with a specific intensity. The roots expect a particular moisture regime, neither too dry nor too saturated, which is created by the daily path of light across that slope. As a result, populations can form narrow bands along hillsides, tracing invisible lines of temperature, light, and water. To someone walking the landscape, it may look almost mysterious that the same flower vanishes as soon as the hill turns. In reality, it is the mark of extremely precise environmental tuning. Certain flowers time their blooming to avoid competitors. In ecosystems buzzing with activity, many species share the same general pollinators instead of relying on brighter colors or larger displays. Some plants choose a subtler tactic by shifting their flowering schedule. They open buds earlier in the season, later in the season, or during specific windows within that season when other blooms are scarce. This timing reduces the clutter of signals that pollinators must sort through and increases the likelihood that visitors will focus on their blossoms. The internal controls that set this schedule draw on cues such as day length, accumulated warmth, and patterns of rainfall. When conditions align with the plant's inherited timing rules, entire populations may burst into flower together, creating a brief period of dominance. Once pollination is complete, the flowers fade. Just as other species begin, this staggered flowering helps multiple plants share the same set of pollinators without direct conflict, each taking a turn at the spotlight. Some flowers hide Their nectar deep inside narrow tubes. Instead of placing rewards on an open surface, certain plants tuck nectar far inside elongated floral tubes. Only animals with the right anatomical tools can reach these concealed reserves. Long-tongued bees, hawk moths with extended feeding organs, or birds with slender beaks can probe to the bottom, while less specialized visitors cannot. This architectural choice filters out inefficient guests that might sip a little and leave without touching pollen. And helpful ways: when a suitable pollinator does reach in, its head or face inevitably presses against the ring of anthers and the receptive stigma positioned around the tube entrance. Pollen dust, the exact body parts that will contact the next flower of the same kind. By pairing hidden nectar with precise geometry, the plant orchestrates reliable pollen transfer while protecting its valuable resource from casual theft. The depth of the tube becomes a gatekeeper, shaping the entire pollination partnership. There are flowers whose colors shift with soil chemistry. In some species, petal color is not a fixed trait, but a sensitive reflection of the ground they grew in. Pigment molecules in the petals change their structure depending on the balance between acidity and alkalinity in the surrounding soil solution that feeds the plant. When roots draw up water rich in certain ions, the internal environment of petal cells shifts, and the same pigment can appear as soft pink, deep violet, or clear blue. Gardeners sometimes notice that the same kind of shrub wears different hues in different beds, or that colors transform gradually as soil conditions change. In the wild, this responsiveness can influence which pollinators are attracted or how well blooms blend with or stand out from the background. It may also allow the plant to adjust to subtle changes in mineral availability. Each flower becomes a small living indicator of the hidden chemistry beneath it, translating invisible conditions into visible shades. Some flowers thrive in volcanic landscapes in regions shaped by eruptions and fresh lava flows. A few remarkable flowering plants take root long before most other life returns. Volcanic ground begins as a harsh mix of ash, pumice, and fractured rock that holds very little water. These flowers survive by anchoring their roots into the smallest crevices where bits of moisture and minerals collect. After rare rainfalls, the ash itself becomes a source of slow-releasing nutrients as it breaks down, creating fertile pockets that these plants can access before any competitors arrive. Their blossoms appear quickly during short windows of favorable weather, allowing them to complete an entire reproductive cycle in conditions that shift rapidly between intense heat and sudden chill. Their roots help stabilize loose volcanic debris, gradually turning barren fields into surfaces that future species can inhabit. These plants are among the first signs of life after destructive events, and their presence demonstrates that even in newly formed landscapes, flowers find ways to adapt, endure, and rebuild the foundations of ecosystem. Certain flowers attract pollinators with infrared heat signatures. Some blossoms communicate using warmth rather than color. Their petals or central structures produce subtle patterns of heat that stand out to insects capable of sensing temperature differences. These warm zones guide pollinators toward nectar and pollen, allowing the visitor to navigate. Even in dim light, the heat comes from concentrated metabolic activity in tissues that act like tiny furnaces within the bloom. During peak pollinator activity, the flower increases this output to create a stronger thermal signal. When fewer visitors are around, the warmth fades to conserve energy. To many insects, temperature-based cues are easier to detect than changes in color, especially in dense or shadowed environments. The thermal patterns also help certain pollinators warn their flight muscles before taking off again. By offering both guidance and comfort, the flower increases the likelihood that each visitor will stay long enough to transfer pollen. This technique shows how blossoms can use invisible forms of communication to interact with the living world. Some flowers carry microscopic mirrors inside their petals. Within the petals of a few species are tiny reflective structures arranged in layers that redirect incoming light. These microscopic mirrors intensify brightness by bouncing light multiple times before it exits the surface, creating shimmering effects that are especially visible to insects with sensitive vision. The reflective layers may enhance a single color by channeling it through membranes that amplify its intensity, or they may produce subtle iridescent flashes that change with viewing angle. These mirrors are made from precise arrangements of clear cells and air-filled spaces crafted through natural growth rather than any external influence. Besides attracting pollinators, the reflections can protect delicate inner tissues by pushing away excessive sunlight. This optical adaptation provides advantages in competitive habitats where many blossoms bloom at once. Each petal becomes both a signal and a shield, demonstrating how flowers can shape light at microscopic scales to improve survival and reproduction. There are flowers that use Velcro-like surfaces to hold pollinators. Some flowers have evolved surfaces filled with tiny hooks or barbs that gently catch onto the bodies of visiting insects. These structures hold the visitor in place long enough to ensure that pollen is picked up or deposited in exactly the right location. The hooks are flexible, allowing the insect to move without injury, yet firm enough to slow its progress and guide it toward specific structures inside the bloom. As the insect navigates these textured surfaces, it passes over anthers and stigmas arranged to maximize contact. This slows nectar thieves that might otherwise slip in and out without contributing to pollination, while encouraging legitimate visitors to interact more fully with the flower. Once the pollinator has completed its task, it can pull free without difficulty. These surfaces reveal how texture alone can shape behavior and create a controlled exchange between animal and plant, all without need for traps or force. Some flowers can survive fire and bloom after ash settles in fire dependent ecosystems. Certain flowers rely on flames to begin their life cycles, while the visible plant may perish in a blaze. Protected structures remain hidden underground where heat cannot reach them fully. After a fire passes, the landscape becomes open and bright, and nutrients released from burned vegetation enrich the soil. These conditions signal the buried tissues to awaken. Shoots emerge quickly, drawing from stored reserves that were saved during the previous growing season. Many seeds in these species require exposure to the chemicals released by smoke to break dormancy, ensuring that germination only occurs once fire has cleared. Competing vegetation, when the new flowers appear, often in large groups, they attract pollinators that search for nourishment in the newly exposed environment. This cycle is not merely survival. It is a strategy that depends on fire as a catalyst for renewal, allowing these plants to claim the landscape at the exact moment when it is most favorable. Certain flowers manipulate airflow to spread their scent efficiently. Blossoms that rely heavily on fragrance often use clever structural designs to guide air currents. Some petals form channels that draw breeze through the flower, allowing scent molecules to disperse at greater distances with minimal effort. Other shapes create vortices that lift aroma upward into layers of air where flying insects travel. Even slight curves or ridges can influence how wind moves across the bloom, shaping scent distribution with surprising precision. These airflow patterns reduce the amount of fragrance needed to reach pollinators, helping the plant conserve energy. Pollinators benefit from clear odor trails that guide them efficiently toward the source by manipulating air. In these subtle ways, flowers extend their reach far beyond what a simple release of scent could achieve. The bloom becomes a small architectural device built to communicate with the atmosphere itself. Some flowers contain natural sunscreens to protect their pollen. Bright sunlight supports growth, but can damage the sensitive grains that carry a plant's genetic material. To prevent this, certain flowers produce protective molecules that absorb harmful ultraviolet light before it reaches pollen. These compounds settle into the outer layers of petals and anthers, forming a shield that remains stable through long hours of exposure. Many of these protective pigments also influence visible color, contributing to deep blues, rich purples, or warm reds. As sunlight intensifies, the flower may increase production of these molecules, strengthening its defenses during the hottest part of the day. By safeguarding pollen from ultraviolet injury, the plant ensures that grains remain viable when carried to the next bloom. This built-in defense system shows how flowers combine beauty with function transforming vivid color into a line of protection for their most delicate structures. There are flowers that grow on rocks with almost no soil. Certain species flourish in environments where soil is nearly absent, clinging to steep cliffs and stone walls that most plants cannot tolerate. Their roots search for microscopic pockets of dust and mineral fragments trapped in cracks. Over time, the roots widen these spaces as they grow, slowly creating a more stable foothold. Because nutrients are scarce, these plants grow slowly and allocate resources carefully. Their leaves may be thick, waxy, or reduced in size to conserve water. Despite these challenges, they produce blossoms that attract pollinators traveling along rock faces or windy ridges. The flowers often bloom during brief periods when moisture is present, taking advantage of every rare opportunity. Their persistence transforms barren stone into living habitat. These cliff dwellers demonstrate how little a plant truly needs when it is adapted perfectly to extremes. Some flowers hide their own scent from predators, while many blossoms rely on fragrance to attract pollinators. Others must avoid drawing unwanted attention from animals that might damage them. These species release scent only in specific directions or only within enclosed spaces formed by their petals. A pollinator that enters the chamber can detect the aroma easily, yet predators outside smell very little. Some flowers alter their scent chemistry so that nectar-carrying notes remain undetectable until a trusted visitor is physically close. Others release fragrance only during short windows of time when certain threats are inactive. These strategies allow the plant to communicate selectively, ensuring that its signals reach those who help rather than those who harm. Scent becomes a controlled resource used with care to balance attraction and protection. Certain flowers use petal temperature to attract insects. Warmth can serve as a powerful invitation, and some blossoms create temperatures higher than the surrounding air. Petals absorb sunlight efficiently, or the plant concentrates metabolic activity in specific tissues that radiate gentle heat. This warmth becomes a beacon to insects that benefit from elevated body temperature, especially in cool climates or early morning hours. A pollinator landing on such a bloom remains longer than it would in a cold environment, exploring the structure more thoroughly and interacting with pollen in more effective patterns. The warm petals also help volatile scent molecules rise into the air, increasing the distance over which the flower can be detected. By offering thermal comfort, these flowers increase their chances of being visited repeatedly. Their temperature-based strategy blends energy management, attraction, and timing into one subtle but powerful advantage. Some flowers have built-in lenses that focus light. Certain blossoms contain petal tissues arranged in smooth curves that shape and redirect sunlight the moment it touches their surface. These natural lenses concentrate brightness toward the hidden reproductive structures of the center of the bloom. By doing this, the flower keeps pollen warmer and more active during cool mornings or cloudy periods when temperatures normally limit its effectiveness. Plant cells create this effect by forming layers with slightly different densities, which causes light to bend gently as it passes through. The focused glow can also appear as a subtle shimmer visible to insects that are drawn to bright contrast. Some pollinators rely heavily on distinctions in light intensity, so this focused reflection becomes a practical signal, not just a visual flourish. The phenomenon allows the plant to attract visitors without producing large amounts of pigment, saving valuable energy. It also provides an advantage in shaded environments where light is scattered and weak. Through simple growth and careful cellular architecture, the flower creates a tiny optical device that strengthens almost every part of its reproductive strategy. There are flowers that grow in complete darkness inside caves, deep within certain caves where daylight never enters and photosynthesis becomes impossible. A few rare flowering plants survive by forging unusual partnerships. Instead of relying on sunlight, these species draw nourishment from underground fungi that break down organic matter carried into the cavern by dripping water or wandering animals. The plants trade structural stability and a safe habitat in exchange for a steady supply of minerals and carbon compounds that the fungi unlock from decaying debris. With no need for green pigments, the flowers appear pale, ghost-like, or even translucent. Their petals are often thick to withstand constant humidity, and their scents linger longer in the still air, guiding cave insects that navigate by touch and smell. These pollinators do not depend on color, so the plant invests in texture and fragrance rather than visual appeal. Some blooms appear only when temperature and moisture conditions reach a narrow balance that might last for only a short time. These flowers show that darkness does not prevent the cycle of blooming. Instead, it creates a world where life adapts through partnerships and sensory strategies very different from those outside the cave. Some flowers offer caffeinated nectar to influence pollinator memory. A few blossoms create nectar that contains natural stimulants, including mild amounts of caffeine, produced by unique biochemical pathways within the plant. When certain insects drink this nectar, the compound sharpens their ability to remember specific scents, petal shapes, and flight paths, leading to the bloom. The effect is subtle, yet powerful. A pollinator that forms strong memories of a particular flower usually returns more often, ensuring that the plant receives repeated visits that greatly increase the chances of successful pollen transfer. The flower benefits by encouraging loyalty without providing more nectar than usual. The stimulant does not harm the visitor. Instead, it enhances learning centers within the insect nervous system, making the bloom stand out among many competing options. Over time, this creates a pattern in which pollinators develop reliable routes that lead back to the same species again and again. The mechanism is one of the most elegant examples of how plants can influence behavior through chemistry alone, shaping relationships that appear almost intentional. A few aquatic flowers create floating highways for beetles. Some water-dwelling plants produce their broad, sturdy petals form platforms that allow beetles and other crawling insects to travel across the water without sinking. These floating pathways guide visitors toward the flower center, where scent, texture, and warmth encourage exploration. The structure of each petal distributes weight across a large area, preventing even heavier insect from breaking the surface tension. Some species create subtle slopes that direct movement inward, while others produce glossy patches that reflect light, helping insects locate the bloom from a distance. Beetles often become covered in pollen as they crawl across these surfaces, and their habit of wandering from one floating flower to another increases the likelihood of successful pollination. The cooperation between plant and insect transforms the water itself into part of the strategy. Each blossom becomes not just a food source, but a bridge that supports life above a liquid world. Some flowers use fungal networks to coordinate blooming. In certain forests and grasslands, flowering plants are connected to vast underground webs formed by symbiotic fungi. These fungal strands move nutrients, minerals, and chemical messages between roots. When one plant senses a change in its environment, such as the arrival of favorable moisture or the presence of specific microbes, it releases signals into the network. Other plants of the same species detect these cues and adjust their internal cycle so that blooming occurs in a synchronized wave. This coordination increases the chance that pollinators will encounter many blossoms at once, boosting overall reproductive success. The network also helps plants conserve energy by preventing early or poorly timed flowering. Because the fungal partners exchange nutrients in both directions, each plant strengthens the system by supporting the others. The blooming event becomes a community decision guided by shared information flowing silently through the soil. This cooperation shows how flowers participate in an underground communication system far more intricate than anything seen above the surface. Certain flowers form symbiotic partnerships with birds. Some blossoms evolve structures that rely entirely on specific birds for pollination. Their tubes match the length of the bird beak, their colors appeal to avian vision, and their nectar composition supports the high energy demands of rapid flight. In return, the bird receives a dependable food source that few competitors can access. The partnership becomes so precise that the plant may bloom only when migratory patterns bring its avian partner back into the region. Feather placement, feeding posture, and wing movement all influence where pollen attaches. During each visit, the bird becomes a mobile bridge between blossoms scattered across a landscape for the plant. This specialized strategy eliminates the inefficiency of attracting multiple pollinators for the bird. It creates a reliable route that provides nourishment during long journeys. This relationship reveals how two very different forms of life can shape one another through countless generations of mutual benefit. Some flowers use sticky threads to capture airborne pollen, while many plants rely on insects or wind. A few species use delicate sticky threads produced inside their blossoms to catch airborne pollen drifting through the environment. These threads form a fine mesh that coats the inner surfaces of the petals or hangs between structures that create narrow passageways as air moves past the bloom. Stray pollen grains that belong to the same species become trapped. Once collected, the grains are moved slowly by capillary forces or gentle petal movements toward the receptive stigma. This method allows the plant to gather pollen even in areas where pollinators are scarce or where breezes are unpredictable. The threads remain effective because they resist drying out and maintain consistent tackiness throughout the blooming period. This quiet strategy blends the randomness of wind with the precision of guided capture. Instead of waiting for a direct visitor, the flower builds its own net to gather what the air brings. There are flowers that bloom for only a single hour. Some species open their blossoms for an extremely brief window, sometimes less than the span of one passing cloud. These flowers store energy and build internal pressure for hours or days before releasing their petals in a sudden unfurling. The short blooming period aligns with a precise moment in the daily rhythm of their environment. It may coincide with the activity of a single insect, a specific change in humidity, or a narrow burst of sunlight that reaches a hidden location. During that hour, the plant performs all essential exchanges of pollen and nectar, trusting that its chosen partners will arrive exactly on time. Once the moment passes, the blossom closes permanently, protecting developing seeds from unnecessary damage. This intense strategy reduces exposure to predators, harsh weather, and energy loss. The flower exists in full form for only the briefest glimpse, yet the entire future of the plant depends on that carefully chosen interval. Some flowers generate subtle magnetic fields. A few species produce faint magnetic signatures through the movement of charged particles within their cells. These fields are incredibly weak, yet certain insects possess sensory organs capable of detecting variations in magnetic direction and intensity. As a pollinator approaches, it notices the shift in the local magnetic pattern and uses it to locate the most rewarding part of the bloom. This effect is not created deliberately. It arises naturally from the arrangement of ions, metabolic processes, and the flow of nutrients through the plant tissues. Still, the structure of the blossom can enhance or focus the magnetic field along particular pathways, creating a consistent signal. The field may also interact with incoming pollen grains or influence how particles settle within the flower. Although invisible to humans, this method adds another layer of subtle communication between plant and pollinator. It demonstrates how even the smallest forces can play meaningful roles in natural interactions. Certain flowers bloom in rhythms linked to lunar cycles. Some species coordinate their flowering with the phases of the moon. Their internal clocks respond not only to changes in daylight, but also to variations in nighttime brightness and gravitational influence. When the moon reaches a specific point in its cycle, these plants initiate a chain of biological events that leads to synchronized blooming across entire populations. Pollinators that travel at night use the increased light to navigate between blossoms more efficiently. During these periods, the timing also reduces competition with species that relies solely on solar cues. In coastal regions, the lunar rhythm may align with tidal patterns that influence moisture levels or temperature changes. By linking their blooming to a cosmic cycle, these flowers create predictability in environments where conditions shift constantly. This connection between plant biology and the steady movement of the moon reveals how deeply the rhythms of life can reach into the natural world. Some flowers produce nectar, but changes flavor throughout the day within certain blossoms. Nectar is not a fixed substance. Its composition shifts through the hours as the plant adjusts sugars, amino acids, and aromatic compounds in response to temperature, humidity, and visitor activity. Early in the morning, the nectar may be richer in simple sugars that provide a fast burst of energy to insects shaking off the cool air of dawn. As heat rises toward midday, the nectar may grow thicker or slightly more complex, creating a reward that lingers on the mouth parts of experienced pollinators that can navigate crowded habitats. Near evening, the flower may produce nectar with softer or more fragrant notes, but appeal to late-arriving species, such as crepuscular moths. These timed adjustments are controlled by internal biochemical pathways that respond to light and nutrient availability. By constantly editing the flavor and texture of nectar, the plant shapes the behavior of the creatures that visit it. The strategy ensures that each type of pollinator receives a reward tailored to its own patterns, while the flower gains consistent and efficient pollination across a full cycle of daylight. There are flowers that release warm fragrances only at sunset. In certain habitats, blossoms wait until daylight fades before releasing their most inviting scents. As the sun dips and the air cools, these plants begin producing volatile molecules that rise in gentle waves. The warmth in these fragrances comes from subtle chemical reactions that require less metabolic effort during evening hours. The result is a rich scent that spreads farther through calm twilight air than it would during the heat of midday. The timing aligns with the foraging habits of nocturnal visitors, such as moths and night-active beetles, that depend more on scent than on sight. These pollinators travel long distances, guided by aromatic trails, drifting across open landscapes. The flowers conserve energy by releasing fragrance only when their preferred partners are active, avoiding waste during daylight hours when scent would evaporate quickly or draw unwanted attention. This rhythm creates a predictable meeting point between plant and pollinator within the quiet transition between daylight and darkness. Some flowers host tiny invertebrate communities inside their blossoms. Inside the sheltered folds of certain flowers live miniature ecosystems composed of insects, mites, and other small creatures. These invertebrates seek refuge within the petals, where humidity remains stable. Predators are scarce and food particles collect naturally. The microhabitat may include pools of condensed moisture, traces of nectar, fallen pollen grains, and plant oils that support an entire community. Some flowers even generate subtle warmth or maintain slightly higher humidity that allows these tiny residents to thrive. The presence of invertebrates can benefit the plant because their movements stir pollen, clean surfaces, or deter harmful insects through simple competition. Over time, these communities develop predictable patterns. Certain species arrive first, preparing the space by consuming debris. Others follow, feeding on the residue or taking advantage of the protective chamber. The flower becomes more than a reproductive structure. It becomes a small dwelling that supports life far beyond its own needs, demonstrating how complex interactions emerge even in temporary spaces. Certain flowers build chemical defenses stronger during full sun. Some blooms increase their defensive chemistry during the brightest hours of the day. When sunlight becomes intense, these plants activate enzymes that release compounds meant to deter herbivores or harmful microbes. Many of these chemicals are bitter or pungent, discouraging animals that might bite into petals or drink nectar. Without contributing to pollination, heat and ultraviolet radiation can also trigger the formation of protective pigments that absorb harmful wavelengths. These pigments appear as deeper reds, purples, or blues and shield delicate structures beneath the petal surface. As evening approaches and light softens, the plant reduces its defensive output to conserve resources. This rise and fall in chemical strength follows a daily cycle controlled by internal clocks that respond to signals of light intensity. By building stronger defenses at the moment when damage is most likely, the plant preserves its fertility and ensures that pollinators encounter blossoms in healthy condition. Some flowers bloom underground and never see light. A handful of rare species produce blossoms entirely beneath the soil surface where light cannot reach. These plants rely on roots and underground stems that navigate through warm, moist earth instead of attracting flying pollinators. they form relationships with burrowing insects or small mammals that travel through the soil. The blossoms produce strong scents that drift through tunnels and cracks, guiding visitors by smell alone. Because petals are protected from sunlight, they do not need vibrant colors or photosynthetic tissues. They're often pale, thick, and resilient, designed to withstand pressure from the surrounding earth. The flower may open within a small chamber created by shifting roots or by the movement of underground animals. Pollination occurs quietly in darkness as visitors carry pollen from one hidden bloom to another. This strategy protects the plant from harsh weather and predators while allowing reproduction in environments where surface conditions are unpredictable or hostile. A few flowers have petals that act like solar panels in regions with intense sun. Some blossoms build petal surfaces that capture and store light energy. For short periods, these petals contain specialized pigments and internal structures that absorb sunlight efficiently and convert a portion of it into warmth or improved metabolic function. The slight increase in temperature inside the bloom helps pollen mature at a steadier rate and keeps visiting insects comfortable enough to stay longer. The captured energy also supports the plant's ability to maintain fragrance production during cooler periods. The effect resembles the way natural solar collectors accumulate heat. The petals do not generate electricity, but they direct absorbed radiation toward reproductive tissues that depend on consistent environmental conditions. By turning sunshine into a controlled resource, these flowers maintain a reliable microenvironment that buffers them from sudden cloud cover or cold winds. The adaptation highlights how petals can serve as functional organs rather than simple displays. Some flowers rely entirely on wind-sculpted blizzards of pollen. There are blossoms that do not court animals at all. They release vast quantities of lightweight pollen into open air, where wind currents carry it across fields, valleys, or forests. The pollen grains are shaped to travel efficiently, often with smooth surfaces and internal structures that help them stay aloft. These flowers usually lack bright colors or strong scents because they do not need to attract visitors. Instead, they invest heavily in producing enormous amounts of pollen to ensure that at least some grains find their way to receptive structures on distant plants. The timing of release often coincides with dry conditions and steady breezes that allow pollen to drift freely. Because the process is unpredictable, the plants have evolved broad margins for success, releasing more pollen than they could ever use. The air becomes the medium of reproduction, turning the landscape into a silent cloud of drifting potential. Certain flowers grow symmetrically only under specific temperatures. Some species produce perfectly balanced blossoms only when the surrounding air remains within a narrow temperature range. If conditions are too cold or too warm, petals may form uneven shapes or fail to align properly around the center. The symmetry depends on the rate at which cells divide and expand, processes that are extremely sensitive to heat within the ideal temperature. Window growth occurs evenly across each side of the flower, creating the familiar star-like or radial patterns associated with many species. When temperatures drift from that range, the flower adapts by producing asymmetrical forms that may still function but appear distinctly different from the ideal structure. Pollinators often prefer the more symmetrical version, which encourages the plant to bloom at times of year when the environment supports reliable development. This connection between form and temperature shows how deeply climate influences floral architecture. Some flowers can detect vibrations from approaching pollinators. There are blossoms that respond to the supple trembling of air produced by the wing beats of insects. Their petals and internal tissues behave like finely tuned sensors that pick up vibrations passing through the plant structure. When the correct pattern of movement is detected, the flower activates rapid adjustments, such as increasing nectar concentration or repositioning reproductive structures. These shifts make the bloom more rewarding and more prepared for the arrival of its visitor. The detection is possible because plant cells are connected by flexible walls that transmit mechanical signals efficiently. Different species recognize different vibration signatures, allowing them to distinguish between helpful pollinators and creatures that would provide no benefit. This sensory ability helps flowers conserve resources by offering their best rewards only when the right partners are nearby. It also synchronizes the timing of pollen release with the moment of contact, improving the accuracy of pollination. There are flowers that evolve petals shaped like radar dishes. A few remarkable species grow petals curved in ways that gather and reflect sound. These shapes act much like tiny listening bowls that amplify the acoustic signals created by flying insects. When certain pollinators approach the dish-shaped petal, focuses the sound towards sensitive tissues that register the vibration. The flower uses this information to determine when to release scent, when to shift its internal temperature, or when to expose fresh pollen. The curved surface also helps some insects locate the bloom by reflecting their own sound back toward them. This mutual use of acoustics creates a sensory dialogue between plant and pollinator. The petal does not merely sit in the environment. It becomes an active surface that influences sound waves traveling through the air by shaping themselves into efficient acoustic tools. These flowers demonstrate that nature can discover similar solutions again and again, even in organisms that remain rooted in place. Some flowers produce soap-like compounds on their surfaces. A small group of flowering plants creates natural foaming compounds across the surfaces of their petals and leaves. These soap-like molecules form when the plant combines certain fatty acids with specialized sugars that break surface tension in water. When rain or dew collects, the liquid picks up these compounds and forms small bubbles along the edges of the blossom. These bubbles deter many insects that might chew on delicate petal tissue, since the slippery coating reduces their ability to grip and climb. The compounds also help the plant remove dust, pollen from other species, and fungal spores that settle in humid conditions. When breezes pass through the flower, the bubbles break and release molecules that can carry subtle scents or defensive signals into the air. The soapy coating also protects the petals from excessive moisture, preventing water from pooling in ways that could cause rot. This adaptation shows how even a fragile-looking blossom can use chemistry to keep its surface clean, safe, and ready for the sensitive work of reproduction. Certain flowers create nectar pools that resemble tiny lakes. In some species, nectar is produced not in small drops, but in large open pools that fill wide floral chambers. These pools can span the entire width of the blossom, forming shallow basins that shimmer in the light as if reflecting the sky above. The depth and volume of nectar attract larger visitors, such as beetles, butterflies, or birds that can move across the pool without damaging the delicate interior. The liquid acts as both a reward and a habitat. Tiny organisms sometimes grow at the edges, feeding on minerals and organic traces dissolved in the nectar. Some flowers use the reflective surface to enhance visibility. Light bounces off the nectar and illuminates complex petal patterns that guide pollinators toward the center. The plant invests heavily in producing this reservoir, but it gains a wide variety of visitors that assist with pollen transfer. These nectar pools transform each flower into a miniature oasis where many forms of life gather and interact. Some flowers protect their seeds with chemical armor. Certain plants guard their developing seeds by surrounding them with potent chemical barriers. These compounds accumulate in tissues that wrap around the seed, creating a protective zone that discourages herbivores, fungi, and insects from invading. The chemicals may taste bitter, produce mild irritation, or inhibit the growth of bacteria. As the seed matures, the concentration of these compounds increases until the protective tissue becomes a kind of shield. Once the seed is ready for dispersal, the chemical armor shifts in composition so that decay or digestion becomes easier when the seed reaches the correct environment. In this way, the plant ensures survival at two stages. First, it keeps threats away during development. Later, it supports germination by allowing the protective layer to break down only under the right conditions. This approach allows the species to protect its future without investing heavily in thick walls or hard shells. Chemistry becomes the seed's first defense and its final key to safe emergence. There are flowers that form labyrinths for insects to navigate. Some blossoms create elaborate internal pathways that twist, rise, and curve in ways that guide an insect through a controlled journey instead of offering direct access to nectar. The flower builds a chamber filled with small ridges, folds, or spiral passages as a pollinator enters. It must follow these routes, brushing against pollen-coated surfaces positioned at precise angles. The maze ensures that the insect cannot move too quickly or reach the reward. Without completing the path, these guided journeys also discourage nectar thieves that are not strong or agile enough to navigate the structure. The labyrinth may vary in complexity between species, but the purpose is always the same. The plant regulates how each visitor interacts with its reproductive parts. These intricate floral designs show how structure alone can create a step-by-step process that transforms a simple visit into an effective pollination event. Some flowers offer shelter to cold pollinators overnight. In chillier climates, certain blossoms become resting places for insects that struggle to maintain body warmth after sunset. Their petals form soft, insulating chambers that trap heat. Absorbed during the day, inside these spaces the temperature remains higher than the surrounding air, allowing pollinators such as small bees or beetles to survive the cold night. The flower gains an advantage as well. When the insect awakens in the morning, it often feeds immediately on the nectar, brushing against fresh pollen and carrying it to nearby blooms. Some flowers even close slightly at night, creating a barrier that shields their guests from wind and frost. This quiet hospitality strengthens the relationship between plant and pollinator, ensuring that both benefit from the arrangement. The blossom becomes not only a food source, but a refuge, providing comfort and safety within its fragile-looking walls. A few flowers build petal structures that function like ladders some species construct. Their petals with stepped ridges or tiny protrusions that resemble miniature ladders. These structures help insects climb toward the nectar, especially in plants with deep floral chambers. Without the ladder-like supports, many pollinators would slip on smooth surfaces and fail to reach the inner region. The ridges also ensure that visiting insects position themselves in ways that align perfectly with the anthers and stigmas. As the insect ascends or descends, the petal steps pollen transfers with impressive precision. The design can accommodate creatures with a variety of body sizes and leg shapes, making the bloom accessible to more than one type of pollinator. The plant benefits by increasing the number of successful visits while reducing damage that might occur if insects scrape their way upward. These textured petals show how a simple structural change can transform a blossom into an efficient, visitor-friendly environment. Some flowers time their scent release with pollinator peak activity. A number of flowering species release fragrance according to strict schedules tied to the behavior of their preferred pollinators. Internal biological clocks control when scent molecules are produced and how quickly they evaporate into the surrounding air. If a pollinator becomes active at dawn, the flower increases its fragrance just before the first light appears. If the pollinator comes out at midday, the bloom saves its energy until the sun stands high. These rhythms require finely tuned chemical pathways that respond to cycles of light and temperature. The timing also prevents waste, since producing scent constantly would drain valuable resources. By coordinating fragrance with pollinator routines, the plant ensures that each scent plume reaches its intended audience while avoiding attention from creatures that might cause harm. This optimized schedule turns scent into a precise communication tool built on the quiet movements of time itself. Certain flowers turn their blossoms to face approaching bees. There are blossoms that shift their orientation slightly when they sense the vibrations produced by nearby bees. These flowers move by altering internal water pressure within specialized cells that can stiffen or relax the petal base. The adjustment is subtle, yet it places the blossom in the most accessible position for a smooth landing. Turning toward the visitor increases the chance that pollen-carrying parts of the bee will make direct contact with the reproductive structures. It also reduces the risk that the bee will collide awkwardly with the petal edges and retreat without entering. The movement happens swiftly once the flower detects the correct vibration signature. Other environmental noises do not trigger the same response. This selective turning highlights an advanced form of sensitivity where the blossom recognizes the presence of its main pollinator before direct contact even occurs. Some flowers can sense when nectar thieves arrive. A few species detect when an animal attempts to take nectar without Contributing to pollination, these intruders may pierce the side of the flower or slip into the chamber. Without touching the pollen-producing structures, the plant responds by reducing nectar production or thickening the fluid so that it becomes harder to rob some blossoms close slightly around the opening, forcing the intruder to work harder or abandon the attempt. These responses rely on mechanical sensors built into the floral tissue when pressure or movement patterns differ from those of legitimate pollinators. The flower activates its defenses by discouraging nectar theft. The plant preserves valuable resources for partners that assist with its reproductive success. This awareness shows that flowers can distinguish between helpful visitors and unhelpful ones through simple yet effective sensitivity. There are flowers that grow exclusively on one hidden cliff or canyon. Certain species exist in extraordinarily limited habitats, confined to a single cliff face, canyon wall, or isolated rock shelf that meets their precise needs. These locations may offer unique conditions, such as mineral-rich water seeping through limestone, a narrow band of temperature stability, or wind patterns that protect delicate stems from damage. The flowers growing in these secret locations often develop features unlike any found in nearby regions. Their roots anchor into cracks formed generations ago, and their seeds disperse only short distances because the surrounding terrain provides no suitable foothold. Many of these species remain unknown to science for long periods because their habitats are difficult to reach. The survival of these specialized blossoms depends entirely on the stability of the small environments they occupy. Their existence demonstrates how deeply plants can adapt to specific places, forming delicate living communities that cling to the quiet edges of the world. Some flowers use microvibration to dislodge pollen. Certain blossoms rely on finely tuned vibrations to release their pollen. Their anthers hold the grains inside narrow chambers that do not open on their own. Instead, they wait for a very specific frequency of vibration produced by the wing beats or body movements of visiting insects. When a pollinator lands and begins to buzz, the vibration passes into the flower's structure. The tiny shaking loosens pollen grains and sends them out in a controlled burst that coats the visitor with remarkable precision. This process prevents random loss of pollen in wind or rain and ensures that the grains fall directly onto the body parts most likely to touch another bloom. Different species respond to different frequencies, which means only certain insects can trigger the release. The system works like a living lock and key, matching the flower's needs with the abilities of its partners. The precision of this method allows the plant to conserve energy by producing only the amount of pollen that will actually be used. Microvibration pollination is one of the most delicate forms of communication between plant and animal, carried out entirely through gentle sounds and tiny movements. Certain flowers build nectaries with multiple chambers inside. Some blossoms are nectaries divided into small, interconnected pockets that store different concentrations or types of liquid. These chambers work together to create a complex structure that controls how a visitor moves through the bloom. When a pollinator inserts its feeding organ, it must navigate through a sequence of chambers, each offering a slightly different taste or texture. This pathway naturally positions the insect for maximum contact with pollen-producing surfaces. The design also slows down feeding, preventing visitors from draining the nectar too quickly. Some chambers refill faster than others, allowing the flower to ration its resources while still providing a satisfying reward. The architecture may even influence which species can reach the inner compartments, ensuring that only the most effective pollinators complete the journey. This multi-chamber system demonstrates how flowers use internal spatial design to shape behavior. The bloom becomes a guided environment where every turn supports the plant's reproductive success. Some flowers use vibrant metallic pigments visible only up close. A few species develop pigments that produce shimmering colors that shift with the angle of light. These pigments create effects that resemble metal or polished mineral surfaces to the human eye. These blooms may look ordinary from a distance, but up close the petals reveal intricate optical patterns that catch attention instantly. Pollinators that approach from nearby see these metallic flashes as strong visual Hues, the pigments, are formed by layers of cells that reflect light, selectively creating tones that move from gold to copper to blue. As the insect circles the blossom, these shimmering patterns may indicate nectar availability or signal that the flower is fresh and ready for pollination. Because the effect is visible only at close range, it encourages insects to approach deeply rather than hovering uncertainly. This adaptation allows the plant to reserve its strongest signaling tools for the final moments before contact, guiding pollinators with precision while conserving energy on long-distance displays. There are flowers that host microbial allies inside their petals within the hidden tissues of certain blossoms, live microbial partners that perform important tasks for the plant. These microbes may consume harmful pathogens, stabilize nectar chemistry, or produce subtle scents that help attract pollinators. The relationship forms through mutual benefit. The microbes receive a protected habitat rich in nutrients, while the plant gains services that improve its overall reproductive success. Some species adjust nectar acidity to support specific microbial communities that produce helpful compounds. Others create tiny pockets inside their petals where these microorganisms can thrive without being washed away by rain or disturbed by visitors. The presence of these allies can influence the taste and texture of nectar, creating unique profiles that certain pollinators come to prefer. These partnerships reveal an intricate layer of cooperation taking place. Inside each bloom, the flower becomes a living home that supports more than one kind of organism, forming quiet alliances that strengthen its ability to survive and reproduce. Some flowers bloom in colors humans cannot see. There are blossoms that display hues outside the range of human vision. These colors lie in ultraviolet regions that insects perceive clearly. To a bee, the petals may shine with bright patterned stripes or halos that guide it toward nectar and pollen. To humans, the same blossom may appear pale or plain. The pigments responsible for these invisible colors form when the plant creates compounds designed specifically to reflect ultraviolet wavelengths. These compounds also protect the flower from harsh sunlight by absorbing damaging rays. Ultraviolet patterns help pollinators distinguish between fresh and depleted blooms. Because the markings often fade as the flower ages, this visual language exists outside our perception but plays a major role in the daily interactions between flowers and insects. The world of color becomes far richer when viewed through eyes built to recognize wavelengths that our own cannot detect. Certain flowers produce nectar that glows faintly in the dark. In some regions, nighttime pollinators navigate using scent and subtle reflections of moonlight. A few flowers enhance this process by producing nectar that emits a soft bioluminescent glow. The glow arises from chemical reactions that release light as molecules break down within the nectar. The illumination is gentle, often visible only in very low light conditions. Yet it provides enough brightness to attract moths and other nocturnal insects. The glowing nectar sits in shallow pools or along narrow channels that lead visitors deep into the bloom. The plant uses this luminous signal sparingly because producing bioluminescent compounds requires energy. The result is a nighttime display that appears only during peak pollinator activity. These glowing nectars transform the darkness into a quiet, shimmering world where each bloom becomes a guiding lamp for the creatures that depend on it. Some flowers use scent decoys that mimic insect pheromones. Certain blossoms release chemical signals that imitate the pheromones used by insects to communicate with each other. These signals may resemble the scent of a mate, a nesting site, or a fresh food source. When an insect approaches expecting something familiar, it instead encounters the bloom. During the investigation, it brushes against pollen-producing structures and transfers grains to its body. The plant gains pollination without offering nectar or any other reward. The decoy does not last long because insects learn quickly to ignore false signals. However, the strategy works effectively during the short blooming periods of these species. The scent molecules are produced with remarkable precision, matching not just the general aroma, but Complex blends that insects use to locate partners. This method allows the plant to communicate in a language that another species already understands, bending that language toward its own needs. There are flowers that share pollinators through complex negotiation tactics. In some ecosystems, multiple flowering species rely on the same pollinators. Instead of competing blindly, they develop strategies that allow them to share these visitors in a coordinated way. One plant may bloom early in the day, another at midday, and another in the late afternoon. Their colors may contrast so strongly that pollinators can move between them. Without confusion, some species adjust nectar volume based on how frequently the pollinator visits each type of bloom. If the pollinator begins favoring one species too heavily, another species may increase scent output to attract attention back. These subtle adjustments create a dynamic balance. No single plant dominates entirely, and pollinators receive a continuous sequence of resources. This quiet negotiation takes place without conscious choice. It unfolds through natural selection, shaping traits that support coexistence. The result is a network of interactions where every species gains stability by recognizing the presence of others. Some flowers shape air currents to carry their pollen farther. The architecture of certain blossoms is designed to influence the movement of surrounding air. Their petals form channels that direct breezes across the anthers, lifting pollen into rising currents. Some petals have curved edges that funnel the air upward, helping the pollen travel above ground level. Where winds are stronger and more consistent, the bloom itself becomes a small aerodynamic structure that uses the motion of the atmosphere as a tool. This strategy benefits plants that have fewer pollinators available or that live in open habitats where wind is a reliable partner. The guided airflow also helps avoid losing pollen to surfaces that would trap or damage it. By shaping the wind rather than relying on it passively, these species increase the distance over which their pollen can travel. Air becomes a carefully managed resource rather than a random force. Certain flowers produce wax coatings to survive extreme heat. In scorching environments where sunlight and high temperatures threaten delicate tissues, some flowers develop thick waxy coatings across their petals. These coatings reflect a portion of incoming sunlight and reduce water loss. Through evaporation, the wax forms a smooth barrier that prevents heat from penetrating too deeply into the flower. Some coatings even carry a faint reflective sheen that cools the bloom by bouncing light away during the hottest hours of the day. This barrier keeps pollen viable and protects nectar from drying out. The coating may soften slightly in lower temperatures, allowing the petals to open fully when conditions are safe. This adaptation enables the plant to bloom in places where heat would otherwise destroy reproductive structures. Wax-coated flowers show how resilient a blossom can become when shaped by an environment that tests every vulnerable surface. Some flowers create spiral petal patterns with mathematical precision within certain species. Petals grow according to strict numerical relationships that produce spirals identical to patterns found in shells, hurricanes, and galaxies. These flowers rely on growth zones located at the center of the bud. As the petals form, each new one emerges at a specific angle from the previous one. This angle repeats through the entire bloom, creating spirals that follow mathematical ratios found widely in living systems. The spiral arrangement helps the flower distribute sunlight evenly across its surface and reduces overlap that could block important tissues. The pattern also influences how pollinators land and move across the bloom. As they follow the natural curves created by the petals, their bodies encounter the reproductive structures in predictable ways that increase pollen transfer. The spiral design is not simply decorative. It serves practical purposes connected to light, airflow, and movement. By shaping itself according to these timeless patterns, the flower becomes a living expression of order that nature repeats across many scales. There are flowers that use natural buoyancy to float upright. Some aquatic blossoms stay perfectly upright on the surface of still water because their tissues contain pockets of air that create natural buoyancy. These pockets form between layers of petal cells and within specialized structures at the base of the bloom. When the flower rises to the surface, the trapped air keeps it level and stable. Even when gentle ripples move across the pond, the upright posture helps the blossom display its colors and scents more clearly to visiting insects. It also keeps pollen dry and accessible. The buoyancy allows the flower to expand fully without being weighed down by moisture. If wind pushes the blossom sideways, the flexible stems and floating tissues guide it back into position. Some species even adjust the distribution of air within their tissues as they age, maintaining balance throughout the blooming period. This ability transforms the water from a potential hazard into a supportive stage. Some flowers store heat from the previous day in environments where nights become cold quickly. Certain blossoms gather warmth during daylight hours and hold it through the evening. Their petals contain dense tissues that absorb solar energy slowly. This stored warmth radiates gently throughout the night, keeping the inner chambers of the flower at a stable temperature. The heat protects pollen grains that would otherwise lose viability in sudden drops of temperature. It also offers comfort to insects that shelter inside the bloom. When morning arrives, the retained warmth encourages early activity in visiting pollinators that are drawn to the inviting microclimate. This adaptation helps the plant begin its daily cycle earlier than nearby species, gaining more time for successful pollination. Storing heat requires careful control of water content, tissue density, and cellular arrangement. The result is a quiet thermal reservoir built entirely through growth and structure, allowing the bloom to thrive despite fluctuating temperatures. Certain flowers form camouflage patterns that hide them from grazers. Not all blossoms seek attention. Some must conceal themselves from grazing animals that might eat the flowers before they can mature. These species develop petal patterns that mimic the appearance of surrounding leaves, rocks, or soil. The colors blend into the environment so effectively that the bloom becomes difficult to spot from a distance. Some flowers even create markings that resemble shadows or light speckles found naturally on the forest floor. When a grazer passes, the flower remains unnoticed while quietly carrying out its reproductive tasks. The camouflage also protects the plant from insects that feed on petals rather than nectar. By blending into their surroundings, these blossoms reduce unwanted interactions and conserve the energy needed to repair damage. The patterns develop as the petals grow, guided by pigments arranged in subtle gradients and textures. The bloom becomes a master of invisibility, surviving by remaining unseen. Some flowers bloom in sequence to guide pollinators through a habitat. In certain landscapes, multiple blossoms of the same species open in a carefully timed order. Plants at one end of the habitat bloom first, followed by those farther along a natural path, such as a stream ridge or meadow edge. Pollinators follow the unfolding wave of blossoms as they move through the area in search of fresh nectar. This blooming sequence directs the insects from one plant to the next, ensuring that pollen travels across long distances. The strategy increases genetic diversity and reduces competition among individual flowers, since each one receives attention in its own window of opportunity. Internal timing mechanisms within the plant respond to small differences in temperature, soil moisture, or sunlight exposure. As a result, each individual knows when to open in harmony with the landscape. The flowering wave becomes a coordinated journey that supports both plant and pollinator. A few flowers grow petals that function like nets. Some species develop petals with interlaced fibers that create delicate net-like structures. These fibers stretch across gaps or openings within the bloom, forming surfaces that are strong enough for insects to grip, yet flexible enough to move with the visitor's weight. The netting helps guide the pollinator toward the nectar chamber by creating surfaces that direct its movement. Small creatures cannot slip through the openings, and larger ones must step carefully across them. As they do, they rub against pollen-covered structures arranged below the net. The plant uses this design to position the insect precisely where contact is most effective. The net also helps protect the flower from rain by breaking droplets into smaller amounts that slide away instead of collecting in the bloom. The result is a functional lattice built from living tissue that supports movement, protects delicate areas, and enhances pollination accuracy. Some flowers change their nectar volume according to visitor frequency. Certain blossoms monitor how often pollinators arrive and adjust their nectar production accordingly. If visits are frequent, the plant produces smaller amounts of nectar to conserve energy. Pollinators that already know the bloom will continue to return even when the reward is modest. If activity declines, the flower increases the volume or richness of the nectar to attract new attention. This dynamic adjustment relies on sensory mechanisms that detect physical contact, subtle changes in pollen removal, or vibrations. On the petals, the plant uses this information to determine how much nectar to produce in the following hours. The result is an efficient system that balances resource use with reproductive needs. The flower never wastes nectar during periods of heavy visitation and never leaves itself unnoticed when activity slows. This adaptive strategy reveals how closely flowers monitor their surroundings and how rapidly they can respond through internal chemical pathways. Certain flowers build hollow petals that act like resonating chambers. Some blossoms create petals with interior cavities that trap and amplify sound. When small insects hover nearby, the vibrations from their wing beats enter these hollow spaces and produce slight echoes. The heightened sound helps pollinators locate the bloom in dense vegetation where visibility is low. The resonance also alerts the flower to the presence of a visitor, allowing it to prepare pollen or adjust nectar concentration. These cavities must maintain a specific shape and thickness to produce the right acoustic effect. They form naturally as the petals develop around small pockets of air. During growth, the echo produced inside the hollow petal is subtle to human ears, but clear to many insects that rely on sound for navigation. By enhancing acoustic signals, the flower communicates within a sensory world often overlooked. Some flowers emit scents that travel vast distances on wind currents. There are species that create fragrance molecules so light and volatile that they drift across open landscapes. These scents rise with warm air currents during the day or travel along cooler ground layers at night. Pollinators detect the aroma from far away and follow the scent trail until they reach the bloom. Producing such long-range signals requires the plant to invest in compounds that evaporate easily yet remain stable over time. The fragrance often changes subtly as it moves through the air, creating a gradient that helps insects determine direction. By sending scent across distances, these flowers compensate for living in sparse environments where pollinators are few. The bloom becomes a beacon carried by the wind. There are flowers that develop only after many years of dormancy. Some species wait through long stretches of time before producing their first blossom. During these years of dormancy, the plant stores energy in underground structures and builds nutrients slowly through modest growth. It does not risk flowering until conditions reach a combination of moisture, warmth, and soil richness that supports successful reproduction. When a moment arrives, the plant directs its stored resources into one intense blooming event. The flowers may appear in great numbers across a habitat where they remain hidden for many seasons. Pollinators respond quickly to this sudden abundance. After the bloom fades, the plants return to their quiet underground existence for many more years. This strategy reduces the risk of flowering in unfavorable conditions and ensures that each bloom has the best possible chance of attracting attention. Some flowers build deep underground tubers that feed their blooms. There are flowering plants that create large underground tubers, acting as long-term reservoirs of water, minerals, and stored energy. These tubers remain hidden beneath the soil. While the surface environment shifts through seasons of drought, heat, and unpredictable weather, when the time to bloom arrives, the plant draws from this underground storehouse to produce blossoms that seem almost impossible for such harsh conditions. The tuber supplies steady moisture, even when rainfall is scarce. It also provides starches that fuel rapid growth of stems and petals. Because the tuber remains insulated underground, it endures extremes that the rest of the plant cannot. Some species use these reservoirs to produce spectacular blooms. After long periods of complete dormancy, the flower that appears above ground is often the smallest part of the organism, supported entirely by the strength of its hidden root structure. This approach gives the plant freedom to survive in regions that swing between abundance and scarcity. The bloom becomes a brief display, powered by years of stored sunlight and careful patience beneath the earth. Certain flowers release mist like aromas that hover Close to the ground, a number of blossoms create fragrances that behave differently from typical floral scents. Instead of rising into the air, these aromatic molecules cling to cooler pockets of atmosphere close to the soil. The scent spreads like a thin mist that drifts along ground level. Rather than lifting upward, this effect forms because the molecules are heavier and condense more readily in cooler layers of air. Many ground-dwelling insects travel within these layers, following scent trails that drift across leaf litter and low vegetation. The plant designs its fragrance to remain exactly where it's preferred. Pollinators live and move the mist like aroma can collect in small hollows where air remains still, forming scent pools that guide visitors toward the bloom. Because the fragrance does not rise quickly, the plant uses far less energy to maintain it. This focused distribution creates an intimate pathway between the flower and the creatures that navigate the quiet world. Near the earth, some flowers form secret chambers where seeds mature safely. Within some species, the flower develops a protective chamber deep inside its structure that serves as a safe room for maturing seeds. This chamber shields the developing offspring from herbivores, insects, and harsh weather. Its walls may thicken over time or accumulate compounds that discourage pests. The interior remains stable, maintaining humid conditions that support early seed growth. Once the seeds reach the appropriate stage, the chamber slowly opens or splits, releasing them into the environment. Some plants create chambers that stay sealed until triggered by precise environmental cues, such as rainfall or warmth. This ensures that seeds enter the world at the moment when survival is most likely. The development of hidden chambers transforms the bloom into both a reproductive display and a fortress. The flower becomes the first guardian of the next generation, using structure and chemistry to protect the tiny life waiting inside. There are flowers that use surface tension as a pollination mechanism. A few remarkable blossoms rely on the physics of surface tension to transfer pollen. They produce small droplets of liquid that cling to the tips of their anthers. When a visiting insect touches the droplet, the surface tension pulls it toward the insect's body, carrying pollen grains with it. The liquid spreads across the insect in a thin film that evaporates quickly, leaving the pollen securely attached. Some blossoms position these droplets along narrow channels that amplify the effect, guiding each droplet's movement with surprising precision. The method works even in gentle breezes because the droplets remain anchored until touched directly. This approach allows the plant to deliver pollen without relying on powder that could drift away. By using water-based physics to its advantage, the flower ensures that every contact becomes a meaningful exchange. It is a finely tuned partnership between biology and the smallest forces of nature. Some flowers create entire microhabitats for ant colonies. Certain plants build blossoms that support full communities of ants living within or around their flowers. These ants receive shelter in small cavities or hollowed structures that form naturally as the bloom develops. In exchange, the ants defend the flower from harmful insects that might chew on petals or steal nectar. Without helping with pollination, the ants patrol, continuously removing pests and keeping the surface clean. The flower sometimes produces tiny droplets of sugary liquid specifically for the ants, strengthening their loyalty as they move across the petals. The ants may also accidentally transfer pollen from one bloom to another, although they are not the primary pollinators. Their presence creates a protective environment that allows legitimate visitors to feed safely. The relationship becomes an intricate example of cooperation between plant and colony. The flower provides a miniature home, and the ants provide security, forming a small world of activity around each bloom. Certain flowers build curled funnels that spin pollinators gently. Some blossoms shape their petals into curved funnels that create a spiraling path toward the nectar. When a pollinator enters the funnel, the smooth curves guide it through a gentle rotation. This slow turning motion positions the insect so that pollen-coated surfaces brush against specific parts of its body. The funnel narrows near the center, ensuring that the pollinator moves close to the reproductive structures before reaching the reward. The swirling pathway prevents quick escapes and encourages a longer visit. The experience is not uncomfortable for the insect. Instead, the curve of the petals works with its movements, allowing it to glide naturally along the spiral. This design increases the chances of successful pollination and reduces the amount of nectar the plant needs to produce. It transforms the bloom into a fluid, dynamic environment where shape controls the flow of each interaction. Some flowers emit scents that change dramatically with temperature. A number of species release fragrances that shift in character. Depending on the warmth of the surrounding air, at cooler temperatures, the scent may be light, gentle, or slightly sweet. As the air warms, the plant activates enzymes that convert certain molecules into others with stronger or more complex aromas. The scent may become richer, deeper, or more noticeable from greater distances. These changes help the flower coordinate with the activity patterns of its pollinators. Insects that move during cooler hours receive subtle hints of the bloom, while those active in hotter conditions follow stronger trails. The temperature-dependent scent also prevents excessive fragrance production when it would evaporate too quickly. By aligning aroma with the rhythms of the day, the flower ensures that every molecule of fragrance serves a purpose. The bloom communicates in a shifting language shaped entirely by heat. There are flowers that grow only after lightning disturbs the soil. Some species require lightning-struck ground to trigger their emergence. When a bolt hits the soil, it alters minerals, increases nitrogen availability, and fractures compacted earth. These changes create conditions that certain dormant seeds, earth seeds, may have been waiting for years hidden beneath layers of earth, until this specific combination of chemical and physical cues appears. After the storm, the ground becomes enriched and slightly rearranged, allowing young roots to enter cracks created by the lightning. As the seedlings grow, they take advantage of the sudden burst of nutrients. When blooming time arrives, the flowers appear in clusters around areas touched by the storm. This strategy ensures that the plant blooms only when conditions have been freshly renewed. Lightning becomes both a destroyer and a catalyst, awakening life that remains silent until the sky opens above it. Some flowers adjust their bloom shape after every pollinator visit. There are blossoms that subtly alter their form each time a visitor arrives. These adjustments may involve changing the angle of petals, repositioning stigmas, or altering the curvature of nectar channels. The shift happens in response to mechanical pressure or slight changes in pollen placement. By adjusting shape, the flower improves the efficiency of future visits. If pollen was removed unevenly, the plant might expose a new portion. If a particular part of the bloom did not receive contact, the flower may reposition it to increase the chance of success. These movements occur slowly yet consistently throughout the day. They represent a form of responsive architecture where the bloom learns from each interaction and evolves moment by moment. This flexible design allows the plant to fine-tune its reproductive strategy across a single flowering season. Certain flowers grow bioluminescent partners that enhance their glow. Some blossoms form relationships with glowing microorganisms that live on or within their petals. These tiny partners produce soft light through natural chemical reactions. When a flower blooms at night, the presence of these microorganisms creates a faint aura that surrounds the blossom. The glow may help nocturnal pollinators locate the bloom in dense forests or open meadows where moonlight is scarce. The plant benefits by attracting specialized visitors, while the microorganisms gain a stable surface rich in nutrients. The partnership often forms when the plant releases small traces of sugar or oils that support the microbes. Over time, the glow becomes a consistent feature of the bloom's nighttime presence. This shared luminosity transforms the flower into a quiet lantern. The light is gentle and steady, revealing a hidden collaboration between two forms of life working together for survival. Some flowers use precise petal geometry to strengthen their structure. A number of flowering species rely on complex geometric patterns to reinforce their petals against stress. Instead of growing flat surfaces, these blossoms develop subtle ridges, folds, or layered contours that distribute pressure across the entire petal. When wind shakes the bloom or raindrops strike with surprising force, the geometric framework absorbs the impact and prevents tearing. The shapes form naturally as cells divide and expand in controlled directions. Some petals contain overlapping layers that resemble tiny architectural beams, giving the flower unexpected strength. While maintaining a delicate appearance, these geometric patterns also influence how sunlight moves across the petal, creating brightness that attracts pollinators more efficiently. Because the shapes help maintain structural stability, the flower can remain open longer, offering more opportunities for successful pollination. The bloom becomes an elegant combination of art and engineering, showing how natural forms develop the same principles that humans use in strong yet graceful design. There are flowers that communicate with pollinators through heat pulses. Certain blossoms produce brief waves of warmth that pulse through their petals. When a compatible pollinator approaches, the flower senses changes in vibration or airflow and responds by activating metabolic processes that generate a quick rise in temperature. This warmth radiates outward in gentle waves that an insect can detect through touch or specialized sensory organs. The pulse signals that nectar is available or that pollen is ready for collection. Pollinators often linger longer on blooms that offer these warm bursts, which increases the accuracy of pollen transfer. By using heat rather than scent or color, the flower communicates effectively even in cool environments or dense vegetation where other signals may be unreliable. The pulses fade within moments, conserving energy while creating a focused invitation. This thermal language provides a quiet and efficient method of coordination between plant and insect. Some flowers produce nectar that acts as natural medicine for insects in certain ecosystems. Blossoms create nectar that contains compounds capable of supporting the health of visiting insects. These compounds may help reduce internal parasites, strengthen immune responses, or improve resilience to pathogens. When pollinators drink this nectar, the beneficial molecules travel through their systems and provide subtle therapeutic effects. Some plants adjust the strength of these compounds depending on seasonal conditions or the presence of particular threats in their environment. The insects that visit these flowers become healthier and more capable of fulfilling their pollination roles. Over time, these blooms become important sanctuaries for species that face constant biological challenges. The plant benefits as well. Healthier pollinators visit more often, carry more pollen, and travel greater distances. The nectar becomes more than a reward. It becomes a medicinal resource shaped through long co-evolution between plant and insect. Certain flowers create protective curtains of scent around their buds. Some plants release dense clouds of defensive aroma that encircle their closed buds. Before blooming begins, these scent curtains act as barriers that mask the presence of developing petals. Herbivores searching for food avoid the area because the aroma signals unpalatable or potentially harmful chemicals. The scent curtain also discourages insects that would pierce the buds and drain their nutrients before the flower has a chance to open. As the bud matures and the petals prepare to unfold, the scent curtain changes, subtly thinning into more inviting fragrances that attract pollinators. Instead, the flower shifts from protection to communication with remarkable timing. This controlled transformation ensures that the delicate tissues inside the bud reach maturity undisturbed, while still allowing the blossom to reveal itself at the perfect moment. Some flowers bloom in shifting ways across entire landscapes. There are species that coordinate their blooming across large areas through subtle environmental cues as temperature, moisture, and sunlight move across a region. The plants respond in synchronized ways. Blossoms appear first in one part of the landscape and then in another, creating rolling patterns of color that sweep across fields, hillsides, or forest understories. Pollinators follow these waves as they travel, ensuring that pollen moves across long distances. The shifting bloom also prevents overcompetition among individual plants, since not all flowers open at the exact same time. Each wave provides a fresh supply of nectar for visiting insects while allowing earlier blooms to complete their reproductive cycle. These waves create a living rhythm in the environment, a quiet dance between plant communities and the changing world around them. There are flowers that develop crystalline like pollen grains. Some species produce pollen grains that form sharp geometric shapes, resembling tiny crystals. These grains contain complex patterns of ridges, facets, and spines that help them adhere to pollinators. Under magnification, the grains reflect light like miniature minerals. Each crystalline structure ensures that the pollen clings firmly to feathers, hairs, or scales during transport. The designs vary between species and may influence which pollinators interact with the bloom. In some cases, the crystalline shapes interlock with textured surfaces inside the flower, guiding the grains into exact positions where fertilization occurs, though invisible to the naked eye. These microscopic structures contribute significantly to the reproductive success of the plant. The flower uses geometry on an incredibly small scale to influence movement and ensure precision. Some flowers form gentle alliances with mosses and lichens in moist or shaded habitats. Certain blossoms grow alongside mosses and lichens in cooperative arrangements. The mosses trap moisture and create a humid microclimate around the base of the flower, helping the plant maintain hydration during warm periods. Lichens contribute by stabilizing soil or breaking down minerals that enrich the surrounding environment. The flower, in turn, provides subtle benefits, such as shading sensitive moss tissues or supplying small amounts of organic material that fall from aging petals. These alliances form naturally and require no deliberate coordination. They arise from simple compatibility between species that occupy the same small spaces. Over time, the group becomes a tiny community in which each organism supports the others. The flower thrives in conditions that would otherwise be too dry or unstable, and the moss and lichen enjoy a sheltered, nutrient-enriched habitat. Certain flowers grow tiny reflective scales that sparkle like starlight. Some blossoms possess minute reflective structures along their petal surfaces that catch sunlight in brilliant flashes. These scales are arranged in patterns that scatter light in multiple directions. As the bloom shifts in the breeze, the scales produce tiny points of brightness that sparkle to nearby insects too. Pollinators, these flashes act as clear signals of a fresh and healthy flower. The scales help the bloom stand out among dense vegetation, guiding visitors directly toward the nectar source. Though each scale is incredibly small, together they create a shimmering display that moves across the petal like scattered stars. The reflective structures also help protect delicate tissues by diffusing harsh light. The sparkle is both a beacon and a shield created through finely arranged layers of natural material. Some flowers build petal cavities that trap sunlight for warmth. Certain species create hollow or concave areas within their petals that gather sunlight during the day. These cavities act as natural warmers that hold heat within the bloom. The captured warmth helps accelerate chemical processes connected to pollen viability and nectar production. When a pollinator enters the flower, it encounters a pocket of air slightly warmer than the surrounding environment. This comfort encourages longer visits, increasing the likelihood of pollen transfer. The cavities also protect the internal structures from cold breezes, functioning as tiny greenhouses hidden within the bloom. By controlling how light enters and where warmth accumulates, the flower supports its reproductive organs. With a stable temperature, the design demonstrates how even small adjustments in petal shape can create meaningful advantages. There are flowers that use slow-motion petal movements to direct insects. A few species rely on gradual, almost imperceptible movements of their petals to guide pollinators. These movements occur over minutes or hours, adjusting the position of openings or shifting pathways that lead to nectar. When an insect lands, the flower may slowly curve its petals inward, gently nudging the visitor toward pollen-bearing structures. Once pollination occurs, the petals may shift again to encourage the insect to exit in a different direction, carrying pollen away to another bloom. These movements depend on changes in water pressure within specialized cells, allowing the flower to alter shape without expending significant energy. Because the adjustments are slow, they do not startle or hinder the pollinator. Instead, they create a controlled experience that subtly improves the accuracy of pollen transfer. Each movement is quiet and deliberate, reflecting a level of responsiveness that unfolds at the pace of plants rather than animals. Thank you for drifting through this quiet journey into the hidden world of flowers. It is easy to think of blooms as simple decorations, yet the closer we look, the more we find intricate systems, surprising strategies, and little pockets of wonder shaped by time. Every petal, every fold, every fragrance carries a story of survival that unfolds at a pace softer than our own. When we understand even a small part of that hidden brilliance, the world feels a little more connected and a little more alive. If you enjoyed this gentle exploration, I invite you to subscribe, or share a thought below. Your support helps others find their way here, one sleepy soul at a time. And whenever you feel curious again, the next video will be waiting for you, ready to offer another quiet place to rest your thoughts. For now, allow your breath to slow, let your shoulders soften, and let the last of the day slip away. Good night.